Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Carl Jung. In a world that once wounded you, you're now stepping into a version of yourself that can no longer be broken. What if I told you that your past pain was never meant to define you, but to awaken you? In today's video on spiritual wisdom, we explore the transformation that happens when you no longer allow anyone or anything to hurt you again, not because the world changed, but because you did. Let us know in the comments, what's one powerful boundary you've set recently to protect your peace? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another step on your spiritual awakening journey. 1. The illusion of strength and the hidden pain. Many people dream of becoming emotionally untouchable, unshaken by rejection, immune to betrayal, and indifferent to criticism. On the surface, this sounds like strength. But behind that desire often lies a hidden truth, the longing to escape the pain that once broke us. The image of being unbreakable becomes a mask we wear to feel safe, a performance we maintain to protect the wounded parts of ourselves that never fully healed. Yet spiritual wisdom reminds us that when we try to numb pain, we also numb joy. When we suppress what hurts, we suppress what is real. Trying to uphold the illusion of strength, pretending everything is fine while you're silently falling apart, only deepens the suffering. It turns the soul into a battlefield where the heart quietly bleeds while the face smiles. Carl Jung saw this clearly. He understood that much of what we call strength is really just fear in disguise. The fear of being seen as weak, the fear of being rejected again, the fear of being vulnerable in a world that often punishes tenderness. But the cost of this illusion is steep. It disconnects us from our inner truth, from our ability to feel deeply and live fully. As long as we try to avoid pain, we remain controlled by it. It lingers beneath the surface, influencing our choices, our relationships, our self-worth. We may think we're protecting ourselves, but in reality, we're keeping ourselves trapped in patterns of emotional numbness and spiritual stagnation. Pain that is denied doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the lens through which we see the world. The more we resist it, the more it persists. This is where the real shift begins, not by pushing pain away, but by facing it with open eyes and an open heart. True strength, then, isn't the absence of pain. It's the ability to stay present with yourself while you're hurting. It's knowing who you are in the middle of the storm. It's choosing to stay connected to your essence, even when everything around you is trying to pull you back into old fears and patterns. This kind of strength doesn't come from performance. It comes from presence. It's quiet. It's grounded. It doesn't shout, but it never breaks. The deepest spiritual wisdom teaches that nothing and nobody will ever truly hurt you again. Not because the world will become kinder, but because you will stop abandoning yourself to please it. You will no longer betray your soul for the sake of appearances. You will no longer sacrifice your truth to earn acceptance. When you stop resisting pain, you become free. When you embrace your humanity with compassion, you become whole. Pain loses its power when you stop running from it, and in that moment, you remember who you've always been. Not untouchable, but unshakable. If you're ready to release the illusion of invincibility and embrace your true strength, the raw, honest, and human comment below. I allow myself to feel and heal. 2. Pain comes from within, not from others. What hurts the most is rarely what others do to you. It's what their actions stir up inside. A harsh comment, a sudden rejection, a betrayal they strike not because they are inherently powerful, but because they awaken something unresolved within you. Carl Jung called this the meeting point between the outer world and the unconscious, the place where life's events become mirrors, reflecting back the wounds you haven't yet healed. The pain doesn't originate in the event. It emerges from the story, the memory, the emotional scar that lives quietly beneath the surface. This is the essence of spiritual wisdom. Pain is a signal, not a sentence. When someone's words shatter your sense of peace, it's not their voice that has power. It's your own inner vulnerability responding. Maybe you were dismissed in a meeting and suddenly felt invisible. That moment taps into a long-buried belief that your presence doesn't matter. Or perhaps someone you love pulls away. And the ache isn't just about them. It's a childhood fear of being abandoned all over again. In this way, the world doesn't injure you. It reveals you. Carl Jung taught that true freedom begins when we recognize this inner dynamic. It's not about blaming yourself. It's about reclaiming your authorship. Others lose their power the moment you realize that the trigger is not the cause, but the invitation. Every emotional reaction is a doorway. Every sting is a map leading back to a place that longs to be seen and healed. That's not a weakness. That's the birthplace of self-mastery. In modern life, these triggers are constant. A friend's success on social media makes you question your worth. A partner's silence leaves you spiraling in doubt. A stranger's criticism ruins your whole day. But the truth is, none of these moments have authority over you unless you grant it. The moment you understand that the source of pain is internal, you are no longer a victim. You are a seeker of truth. The path of healing, then, is not to harden yourself or escape emotion, but to meet each wave of feeling with compassion and curiosity. You don't need to become untouchable. You need to become aware. When you bring your attention to the wound instead of the weapon, you start to shift. You stop defending and start listening. You stop hiding and begin integrating. And in that space, nobody, not even the harshest critic or the deepest betrayal, can truly harm you. Carl Jung's insight is timeless. What happens inside you determines everything. When you stop being reactive and start being reflective, you reclaim the power you unknowingly gave away. You step into a life where every experience becomes a teacher, where pain no longer controls you, but guides you, where the world may still be chaotic, but your inner life is rooted in peace and presence. This is not about building walls. It's about becoming whole. And when you are whole, nothing and nobody can break you again. Are you ready to reclaim your power from within? If this message speaks to your heart, comment below. I will heal within to show your commitment to inner transformation. 3. The battle is within. The role of the unconscious. As long as your unconscious remains hidden, it quietly governs your life, shaping your choices, emotions, and reactions in ways you can't fully see. And yet, you call it fate. You wonder why pain keeps coming back, why similar wounds resurface, why the same emotional storms return no matter how much you change your surroundings. But the answer is not outside of you. It lives deep within. Pain, anger, and sadness are not random burdens. They are messengers, signals from repressed parts of your psyche calling out to be seen, heard, and finally understood. When you ignore them, they don't disappear. They grow roots and silently dictate the direction of your life, showing up as anxiety, chaos, or cycles you can't seem to escape. Suppressing your truth only feeds the shadows. Every time you silence your grief, swallow your rage, or pretend you're fine when you're not, you plant seeds of inner fragmentation. Those seeds grow into patterns that repeat over and over until you stop and face them. It's not a weakness to feel deeply. What weakens you is avoidance. Because the moment you judge your pain or deny your sadness, you reinforce the lie that parts of you are unworthy of love. That's when the real suffering begins, not because of what others do to you, but because of how much of yourself you feel forced to hide. Healing starts when you stop fighting your own emotions. Spiritual awakening isn't about becoming endlessly calm or universally forgiving. It's about becoming fully conscious. That means turning toward what hurts, what's buried, what was too overwhelming to feel before. Integration is the true medicine. You don't heal by pushing darkness away. You heal by allowing it to come into the light, by gently sitting with your wounds and letting them speak. When you welcome these neglected parts of yourself, something powerful happens. The pain loses its grip, and you reclaim the pieces of your soul that were once forgotten. You realize that no one can hurt you unless there's already a wound inside waiting to be triggered. That's the great liberation. The world may still act as it always has, but you no longer respond with the same inner chaos. Why? Because you are no longer a prisoner of your unconscious. You've met your pain with compassion, your fear with presence, your sorrow with understanding. And when you do this, the war inside ends. You become whole, not by erasing your darkness, but by making it conscious, just as Carl Jung taught. This is the heart of spiritual awakening, not escaping life, but embracing every part of your inner world with truth, love, and unwavering awareness. Have you ever listened to the voice of your unconscious? If so, share your experience in the comments to help others feel less alone. If not, comment, "I'm ready to face it," and let's begin this powerful journey of healing and integration together. 4. Becoming untouchable comes from acceptance, not defense. Real emotional invulnerability is not about building walls or pretending you're unaffected. It's about developing such deep inner clarity that you no longer need to defend yourself. The phrase, "I don't care," has become a mask that many wear. But behind it, there's often a heart that's quietly bleeding. What most people call strength is often just suppression. But true power doesn't come from hiding your pain. It comes from accepting it, from looking it in the eye without flinching, and choosing to integrate it instead of running away. When you suppress your wounds, they don't disappear. They go underground. They show up in defensiveness, in emotional numbness, in the inability to truly connect. That's why so many people appear strong, but are secretly exhausted. They're fighting battles with themselves just to appear okay. But spiritual wisdom teaches that real transformation doesn't begin with pretending you're above the pain. It begins when you stop judging yourself for having it. Your pain, your fear, your shame. These aren't weaknesses. They are portals. Portals to your most authentic self. To integrate your shadow means to sit with what you usually avoid. It means not pushing away your rage or your grief, but asking, What do you need to tell me? The more you do this, the more you begin to realize that emotions are just energy-seeking acknowledgement. And once acknowledged, they lose their power to control you. You stop reacting impulsively. You start responding with clarity. You stop being ruled by past wounds. Instead, you observe them, honor them, and gently disarm them. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop collapsing every time someone triggers you. You become rooted in yourself. Your peace is no longer negotiable. When people insult you, you no longer take it personally. When they abandon you, you no longer lose yourself. You begin to understand that other people's actions are not about your worth. They are reflections of their own wounds. And so you stop internalizing their chaos. You become untouchable, not because you're closed off, but because you're open to your truth, open to your feelings, and open to healing. This is not the cold, sharp strength the world glorifies. It's a quiet, grounded strength, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything, the kind that radiates from within. When you embody this energy, even your silence becomes powerful. Even your presence becomes protection. You realize that the real battlefield was never outside, it was always within. And once you stop fighting yourself, the outside world loses its grip on your soul. You no longer need to control everything. You no longer need to be liked. You no longer need to win every battle. Because you've already won the one that mattered most. The battle to come home to yourself. That's when nothing and nobody can truly hurt you. Not because you've become hard, but because you've become whole. If this message resonates with your heart, take a moment to declare it. I become untouchable through acceptance, not defense. I embrace my truth and trust the process. Let this be your affirmation today. And if you feel it deeply, comment below and share your light with others on this path. 5. Individuation. Becoming whole, not perfect. Carl Jung taught that individuation is not about striving for perfection, but about becoming whole, integrating every part of your being, especially the ones you've been taught to hide. Most of us think healing means fixing what's broken, improving what's lacking, or becoming someone better. But the truth is, you are not here to become better. You are here to become real, to remember the parts of yourself you disowned, to embrace the full spectrum of your existence, joy and grief, confidence and doubt, beauty and pain, and allow them to coexist without shame. The more you run from pain, the more power it has over you. The moment you try to bury it, suppress it, or mask it with positivity, it begins to rule your life from behind the scenes. People often confuse emotional numbness with strength, but Jung made it clear: repression only deepens suffering. What we refuse to face will continue to control us. And it's not the pain itself that makes us fragile. It's the resistance to feeling it. There's a woman I once knew who wore her achievements like armor. She was successful, admired, and always in control. But beneath it all, she was terrified of being vulnerable. Every failure felt like a collapse. Every criticism cut deeper than it should have. Her strength was performative. She didn't need more achievements. She needed to grieve. She needed to sit with her loneliness without trying to escape it. When she finally did, she stopped trying to be perfect. She started becoming whole. Her transformation didn't come from learning more. It came from unlearning the belief that she had to earn her worth. Carl Jung believed that the shadow, the part of ourselves we hide, is not our enemy. It is our teacher. And until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. That's why the path to inner freedom is not about becoming untouchable or immune to life's pain. It's about becoming intimate with it. The pain does not disappear, but your relationship with it changes. You stop reacting, and you start observing. You stop identifying with your wounds and start recognizing them as part of your human story, not the whole of it. You will find real strength the day you stop trying to appear strong and start being honest. The day you hold your sadness without rushing to fix it. The day you look into the mirror, see every contradiction, and say, I still belong. You don't need to fight your darkness to be free. You need to include it. That's what wholeness is. And when you finally become whole, when you accept the light and the shadow, the ego and the soul, nothing and nobody can hurt you in the same way again. Because your safety no longer depends on the outside world. It comes from the truth within you. Stay connected with our spiritual wisdom community by subscribing to the channel. Here, we explore the journey of becoming whole, not perfect, through self-awareness, healing, and truth. Remember, your contradictions aren't flaws. They're keys to your freedom. You are not broken. You are becoming. Let's walk this path together. 6. Suffering is the beginning of transformation. Suffering is not the enemy. It's a sacred signal, a whisper from the soul that something within you needs to be seen, felt, and healed. Depression is not a flaw in your character. Anxiety is not a defect in your design. And apathy is not laziness. These are the cries of forgotten emotions, the echoes of pain you've pushed aside for far too long. Carl Jung once said that pain is a messenger. So instead of silencing it, avoiding it, or masking it with distractions, you are invited to listen. Because the moment you begin to listen, you begin to awaken. Spiritual awakening doesn't begin with clarity. It often starts with confusion. When you can no longer fake your way through life, when your old masks no longer fit, and when joy seems like a distant memory, this is not the end. It's the threshold. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. The darkness you feel isn't punishment. It's preparation. The emptiness is not failure. It's a sacred space being cleared for the truth. And the truth is this: you don't need fixing. You need to be met with compassion, especially in your most fragile places. When you stop resisting your pain, something shifts. The energy you once spent running, hiding, or numbing is now available for healing, for integration, for transformation. Jung reminds us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That means the stories you keep reliving, the same heartbreak, the same self-doubt, the same emotional triggers, are not curses. They're invitations. They're the soul's way of guiding you back to yourself over and over again until you finally choose to come home. This process isn't comfortable, but it is sacred. You will grieve things you thought you got over. You will feel emotions you never had words for. You will face the version of you that you abandoned just to survive. But in doing so, you will reclaim your wholeness. You'll see that your wounds didn't make you weak. They made you wise. You'll realize that your sensitivity is not a burden. It's a bridge to the divine. The world may teach you to be untouchable, to stay strong, to smile through the storm. But true strength is not the absence of pain. It's the presence of courage. the courage to sit with yourself, the courage to stop pretending, the courage to feel everything fully, honestly, and without shame. Because once you allow yourself to feel, you stop being a victim of your pain and become a vessel of your power. This is the essence of spiritual wisdom. It's not about escaping suffering, but learning from it. It's not about bypassing your darkness, but walking through it with light. You don't transcend pain by ignoring it. You transcend it by understanding it, by honoring it, and by allowing it to reveal the parts of you that are still alive, still longing, still holy. Spiritual awakening is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been, beneath the layers of protection. It's about returning to the self that trusts its own voice, feels its own truth, and knows its own worth, not because it was taught, but because it was remembered through the fire. 7. True strength is born in the ruins of the ego. True strength is born in the ruins of the ego, where everything you once relied on, your titles, your image, your old stories, no longer hold. Growth does not begin with gaining something new. It begins with losing what is false. You start to outgrow the roles you once clung to, the beliefs you inherited to survive, and the masks you wore to be loved. The more deeply you evolve, the more you realize that these masks kept you safe, but they also kept you small. Letting go is painful, but it is also necessary. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. When life tears down what you've built, you come face to face with yourself. Not the version of you who performs, pleases, or pretends, but the one who's been quietly waiting underneath all the noise. That collapse, the heartbreak, the loss, the moment when everything stops making sense is not a mistake. It's a sacred invitation. What feels like the end is often the soul's way of calling you back to truth. The ego fears this unraveling because it thrives on identity and control. But the soul sees freedom in the fall. Beneath every breakdown is the opportunity to break through. Pain, though uncomfortable, is the most honest mirror you'll ever look into. It doesn't lie. It exposes the illusions you've mistaken for truth. It shows you what's wounded, what's been abandoned inside you, and what is finally ready to be seen. Instead of pushing it away or numbing it down, you begin to sit with it, breathe into it, and listen. You learn that suffering is not a punishment from life, but a doorway to awareness. This is spiritual wisdom. Pain cleanses the spirit of deception and softens the walls built by fear. Every wound becomes a message. Every scar, a sign that something has been transformed. And this is the sacred crossing from the ego's frantic need to fix and control to the soul's quiet power of presence. When you stop trying to prove yourself and start feeling yourself, everything shifts. You are no longer desperate to be untouched by life. Instead, you become open, grounded, deeply connected. Your power is no longer reactive, it's receptive. You don't resist the moment, you become the moment. That is what makes you untouchable, not because you feel no pain, but because you are no longer owned by it. This is the essence of spiritual awakening. The ego breaks so the soul can breathe. Nothing outside you can truly harm you once you return to who you really are. Not because you are armored, but because you are aligned. When you stop clinging to who you were, you finally make room for who you are meant to be. And in that space, in that silence, you find a strength the ego could never touch. 8. Few will walk this path, but it's the only real freedom. Most people will never choose this path, not because it is hidden, but because it demands depth over comfort, truth over convenience. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole by facing the parts of yourself you've been taught to ignore, reject, or fear. It is not a journey of becoming better. It is the courageous unraveling of who you thought you had to be, so that your true self can emerge not as a performance, but as your natural state. This path strips away illusions. You no longer seek approval or wear emotional masks for protection. The idea that emotional armor is a shield falls apart. True emotional strength is not about building walls. It is about integration. You do not harden. You soften into your center. You stop reacting. You start responding. Life no longer pulls you from the outside because something unshakable has taken root within. The noise of the world fades, not because it disappears, but because it loses power over your peace. Carl Jung understood that the deepest suffering comes from living a life that betrays your essence. Many people feel exhausted, not because they are weak, but because they are disconnected. They live in constant performance, smiling on the outside, bleeding silently within. That's the tragedy of our time, mistaking connection for meaning, applause for self-worth. But when you walk the path of individuation, you begin to dismantle the lies. You stop asking, "Who do they want me to be?" and start asking, "Who am I when no one's watching?" A woman once described reaching success by society's standards of wealth, recognition, stability, yet feeling hollow at the height of her accomplishments. Her soul had gone quiet, so she walked away, not to escape, but to rediscover. She sat with her wounds. She listened to the inner child she had silenced. She faced the shadow she had spent years avoiding. And in doing so, she didn't become someone new. She remembered someone ancient within herself. That is spiritual wisdom. That is healing. The more you walk this path, the less you explain yourself. You don't need to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't perform strength. You radiate peace. You don't suppress your wounds. You integrate them. You don't fear rejection because you are no longer seeking belonging outside yourself. When you are whole, even your silence speaks louder than someone else's performance. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That choice is yours, every single day. Not to be untouchable in the way the world defines it, but to be whole in the way the soul craves. The more you embody your inner truth, the more untouchable you become, not because nothing hurts, but because nothing breaks you. You are no longer held hostage by the fear of loss, rejection, or judgment, because you've reclaimed the very parts of you that were once used to control you. Few will walk this path, but those who do will discover a freedom that can't be taken, a peace that doesn't need permission, and a strength that isn't reactive, it simply is. That is the quiet power of becoming whole. That is the spiritual wisdom Carl Jung devoted his life to sharing. 9. Consciousness is the final shield. External suffering is endless when you remain unconscious of your inner wounds. You can change your job, your partner, your city, but if the same emotions follow you everywhere, the pain will return in new forms. What truly hurts isn't the event itself, but the story you tell yourself about it, the way old trauma colors present experience. Carl Jung once said, What you resist persists. And it's true. The emotions you suppress don't disappear. They wait. They hide behind your smiles, behind your ambition, behind your silence, until one day, something small breaks you, and you don't even know why. Awakening is not a one-time event. It's a daily practice, a quiet revolution within. Each day, you are faced with moments that invite you to choose awareness over reaction, presence over avoidance. Most people run from their pain by blaming others. But healing begins the moment you stop pointing outward and begin to ask, why did this hurt me so deeply? That question doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. When you stop pretending and start listening, you no longer need to defend yourself against life. You become someone who can feel without drowning. Immunity is not the absence of pain. It's the clarity to see pain for what it is, a signal, not a threat. You don't have to become hard to protect yourself. In fact, the harder you become, the more fragile you feel. Real strength is soft. It's rooted. It says, I can feel this and still stay present. That is what makes you untouchable, not because you don't feel, but because your feelings no longer control you. When you integrate what you once denied, grief, fear, anger, you stop living in reaction. You start living in truth. Spiritual awakening is this exact moment of honesty, when you choose to face what's inside, not escape it. And in doing so, you finally understand nothing, and nobody ever really hurt you. They only revealed what was already wounded. This isn't to blame. It's liberation. You're not a victim of the world. You're the one holding the key. So if there is something in you that is ready to feel without fear, to transform without pretending, comment, I choose awareness. That decision, made over and over, is the path out of suffering. Not perfection, not numbness, but awareness. And from that awareness, a new life begins, where you are no longer dependent on the world, but guided by the truth from within. And so, remember this truth. When you reclaim your power and rise above fear, nothing and nobody will ever truly hurt you again. The wisdom of Carl Jung teaches us that inner strength is not found in controlling the outer world, but in mastering your inner world. If this message spoke to your heart, I invite you to like this video, share it with others who may need these words, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming videos filled with insights to guide your spiritual awakening and personal transformation. Carl Jung warned us, when the empath snaps, it's already over. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. If you've ever felt like you're carrying the emotional weight of the world, this message is for you. Empaths aren't just sensitive, they're spiritual mirrors, absorbing pain that isn't theirs, until one day, they break. But what if snapping isn't a breakdown, but a breakthrough? In this video, we'll uncover the psychological and spiritual tipping point that Carl Jung warned us about when the empath finally reaches their energetic limit. What happens after that can be life-changing. Have you ever reached your limit and snapped, only to discover a deeper version of yourself waiting on the other side? If so, share your experience in the comments. Let's grow together. 1. Empaths absorb emotional toxins like sponges. Empaths live without psychological skin, absorbing the emotional weight of others like invisible sponges, not out of weakness, but because their spiritual nervous system is wired to feel deeply and universally. They don't just notice pain, they embody it, often before the person in pain even realizes it's there. This heightened emotional intelligence, rooted in mirror neuron hyperresponsivity, is a spiritual gift mistaken by society as oversensitivity. But what looks like fragility is actually a form of rare inner vision, a sensitivity so refined it can detect unspoken wounds and energetic dissonance in any room. Yet this sacred sensitivity becomes dangerous when unconscious. Without awareness, the empath becomes a container for everyone else's emotional residue, carrying not only their feelings, but their unhealed shadow projections, rage that hasn't been owned, sorrow that hasn't been expressed, fear that hasn't been faced. In modern life, this manifests as chronic anxiety, exhaustion after social interaction, or even physical illness with no logical cause. The empath begins to believe they are broken, when in reality, they are saturated. People-pleasing becomes a survival mechanism, not because the empath lacks strength, but because they've been conditioned to believe that harmony is worth self-erasure. This creates an emotional fog where they can't distinguish their energy from others, and every harsh word, silent judgment, or subtle rejection lodges into their nervous system like a psychic bruise. And the worst part? They often blame themselves for it, internalizing chaos that never belonged to them in the first place. Carl Jung warned that what remains unconscious rules our lives, and for empaths, this is especially true. The burden of absorbing other people's pain becomes a silent identity until spiritual awakening cracks it open. Once awakened, the empath begins to ask, what if this sensitivity isn't a curse, but a compass? What if I can feel deeply without drowning? This is where the inner shift begins, not in suppressing emotion, but in recognizing energetic sovereignty. Through spiritual practice, boundary work, grounding, and self-inquiry, the empath transforms from emotional sponge into conscious observer. They stop merging and start witnessing. They no longer carry what isn't theirs, but learn to hold presence without attachment. Their sensitivity no longer enslaves them, it sharpens them. It becomes a force of discernment rather than distortion. The empath doesn't stop feeling. They start feeling with clarity. This is the power of spiritual wisdom. To see that the same sensitivity that once overwhelmed you is the very thing that can elevate you when it is no longer hijacked by the unconscious projections of others. Comment below. I cleanse my energy daily. If you're ready to stop carrying what isn't yours and protect your spiritual peace. 2. Carl Jung's shadow carrier concept. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow carrier reveals a painful yet liberating truth. Many highly sensitive individuals unconsciously absorb the emotional shadows others cannot face: repressed guilt, hidden shame, silent rage, and invisible sorrow. This isn't compassion gone too far, it's energetic entanglement. The empath becomes a spiritual sponge, soaking up the emotional toxins others leave behind, not out of malice, but because they lack the self-awareness or emotional courage to own their inner darkness. And as this burden grows heavier, the empath begins to question themselves. You start thinking something's wrong with you. Why am I always so anxious, so tired, so overwhelmed? Why do I feel like I'm drowning in invisible storms no one else seems to notice? It's because what you're feeling often isn't yours. You're carrying the denied emotions of those around you, and their projections distort your self-image. You mistake absorption for identity, assuming that the emotional chaos you sense must originate within. But in truth, you're just the one brave enough or sensitive enough to feel what others refuse to acknowledge. This is where the spiritual damage begins. When an empath doesn't know they're a shadow carrier, they internalize other people's wounds as their own flaws. You might feel like you're too intense, too fragile, too much for the world. But what if you're not too much? What if you're just too open in a world that's too closed off? In spirituality, every energy exchange has a consequence, and empaths often bleed spiritually because they mistake emotional labor for love and psychic absorption for service. Over time, this lack of energetic boundaries leads to a fracture in your spiritual development. You begin to confuse compassion with self-sacrifice, intuition with responsibility, love with rescue. But Jung warned us that the unconscious will rule our lives unless we make it conscious. And for empaths, this means learning the difference between what is yours and what never was. The snapping of the empath is not a collapse, but a sacred rupture. It's the moment when the soul says no more, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. The empath's eruption is not about rage, it's about release. It's a spiritual awakening disguised as a breakdown. You walk into a room and feel the silence vibrating. You sense the conflict behind someone's smile. You carry the grief that no one dares to speak of. This is not weakness. It is sensitivity tuned to the frequency of truth. But if you don't learn to protect that sensitivity, it will become a curse instead of a gift. The journey of spiritual development is learning how to feel deeply without drowning, how to care without collapsing, and how to carry your light without becoming a dumping ground for shadows. You are not a broken being. You are a sacred mirror. And the moment you begin to discern what belongs to you and what doesn't, you begin to heal. You begin to reclaim your energy, your peace, your truth. You realize that spirituality is not about absorbing the world's pain. It's about transmuting it, and that only happens when you stop carrying what was never yours in the first place. 3. Participation, mystique, and psychological overwhelm. Carl Jung's concept of participation mystique reveals a haunting truth for the empath. You don't just feel others, you fuse with them. Your spirit, wide open and unguarded, becomes a sponge for emotions that were never yours to carry. You take on your mother's guilt, your partner's insecurity, your friend's bitterness, and your co-worker's fear. And because your spiritual wisdom is rooted in deep emotional intelligence, you think it's your job to fix what isn't broken inside you. But this isn't healing, it's entanglement. It's an unconscious merging that leaves you fragmented, confused, and drowning in energetic residue. You begin to forget where you end, and others begin. Their shame becomes your inner critic. Their chaos becomes your restlessness. Their emptiness becomes your silent grief. This is the psychological infection Carl Jung warned us about when the unconscious shadows of others are deposited into your psychic system, and you, unknowingly, accept them as your identity. You wake up tired, without knowing why. You feel heavy after conversations that seem normal to everyone else. You second-guess your intuition, not realizing it's been layered with emotional noise from the outside world. Empaths often think they are sensitive, but the truth is deeper. They are boundaryless mystics in a world that thrives on emotional transaction. The narcissist, the manipulator, the wounded, these people don't just take your kindness, they energetically offload their darkness into you. Because you don't resist. Because you're wired to feel. But what happens when the empath stops absorbing and starts remembering? That's when the snap comes and it's quiet. It's not an explosion, it's a reclamation. When the empath snaps, they don't yell. They detach. They go no contact. They walk away without a warning, without a war. Because the war was inside them all along. And when their spirit finally reaches its saturation point, when the soul says, enough, the empath begins to shed everything that was never theirs. That is the turning point. That's when the healing begins. But by then, it's already over for those who mistook their silence for weakness, who confused their softness with servitude, who thought the empath would never leave because they always stayed. This is not an emotional drama. This is spiritual clarity. You see, intelligence isn't just in logic or words. It's in how your nervous system reads energy, how your heart filters unspoken truth, how your body responds before your mind can explain. And yet, without awareness, that intelligence turns inward and becomes a weapon against yourself. Carl Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But when only one person transforms and the other continues to dump, that's not alchemy, it's self-destruction." To the empath, your softness must be fortified by structure. Your gift must be guarded by grounded awareness. Your love must be held within a container of self-respect. Emotional fusion is not empathy. Absorbing pain is not the purpose. So when you begin to feel the unraveling, when you realize the anxiety isn't yours, the doubt isn't yours, the guilt isn't yours, you are awakening. You are remembering. You are returning to yourself. And that truly is when the empath becomes untouchable. Have you ever felt like you were drowning in someone else's energy without even realizing it? If you've experienced this kind of invisible entanglement, share your story in the comments below so others can feel less alone. If this concept is new to you, comment, "I will observe my energy boundaries," so we can start this journey of spiritual awareness together. 4. The breakdown is a breakthrough in disguise. Eventually, the empath reaches a point where the soul can no longer tolerate the weight of silent suffering. This snapping point is not a sign of failure, but a signal of transformation. What appears to others as a breakdown is, in truth, a sacred dismantling of an intelligent, spiritual recalibration. The psyche, overwhelmed by years of repression, unmet needs, and unspoken boundaries, initiates a controlled collapse to make space for the emergence of the true self. Carl Jung warned that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And this moment of inner implosion is precisely that the unconscious rising to reclaim its rightful place. The empath, who has carried the emotional burdens of others, suddenly finds they can no longer suppress the scream of their own soul. This isn't sensitivity gone wrong. It's energetic wisdom asserting itself. The rage that erupts is not dysfunction, but long neglected truth demanding recognition. In spiritual awakening, this moment is not the end, it's the initiation. The empath does not shatter because they are weak, but because they are finally strong enough to stop lying to themselves. This psychic rupture becomes a spiritual breakthrough when the empath realizes their exhaustion is not a flaw, but a feedback mechanism. The nervous system shuts down, not out of failure, but out of protection. The tears, the rage, the withdrawal. These are sacred symptoms of a system detoxing from emotional slavery. In modern life, burnout is romanticized as a side effect of ambition. But in spiritual wisdom, it's often the soul's way of saying, enough. The empath has reached the edge of false peace and now must choose authenticity over approval. And this choice, though painful, is the birth of personal sovereignty. No longer able to play the role of the silent healer or the emotional sponge, the empath awakens to their own inner authority. Their too much becomes their power. Their collapse becomes their clarity. The walls they built to protect others now fall to reveal the sacred core of their own truth. In this space of radical honesty, the empath begins to set boundaries, not out of bitterness, but out of deep self-respect. When the world around them sees only chaos, the empath is actually remembering who they were before the world taught them to forget. The spiritual awakening disguises itself as an emotional crisis, but what it really brings is rebirth. This is not the unraveling of someone losing their mind. It's the arrival of someone reclaiming their soul. The empath is no longer available for self-betrayal. They are no longer willing to spiritualize their own suppression. They realize that the most sacred service they can offer is to become whole. And so, in this breakdown, this holy undoing, they don't fall apart. They fall into alignment. They don't collapse to escape life. They collapse to finally live it. 5. The shadow is a hidden treasure chest. Carl Jung taught us that the shadow is not just a container of our flaws, but a forgotten vault of power, an inner realm where our rejected strengths have been buried alive beneath layers of shame, fear, and societal conditioning. For empaths, this truth is especially urgent. Since childhood, many empaths have been trained to equate anger with danger, to see boundaries as betrayals, to mistake exhaustion for compassion, and to silence their inner voice in order to remain likable. But what if the very things you were taught to hide your righteous anger, your need for space, your instinct to say no, are not spiritual failures, but spiritual gifts in disguise? What if your anger is not violence, but clarity, not destruction, but the fire that forges healthy distance? What if your selfishness is not greed, but sacred self-preservation, the necessary act of keeping your soul intact in a world that constantly pulls you into its chaos? Jung warned that what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. And when the empath resists the shadow, it builds silently until it erupts. When an empath snaps, it's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. It's the soul reclaiming its voice after years of spiritual silence. That suppressed no becomes the superpower that frees you from emotional slavery. That guilt over choosing yourself transforms into the fuel for radical healing. True spirituality is not about being endlessly agreeable. It is about standing rooted in your truth with grace and fire. Spiritual development means reclaiming the fragmented parts of yourself and weaving them into a whole that no longer depends on validation to feel worthy. The empath's shadow is not a curse. It is the map back to sovereignty. And the moment you choose to own it, to sit with it, to bless it instead of fearing it, you become something no one can manipulate. Integrated, self-aware, energetically protected. Spirituality is not about floating above the mess of life. It is about descending into your own depths, facing what was hidden, and rising with the kind of wisdom that comes only from surviving your own darkness. Integration does not harden you. It solidifies you. It does not make you cruel. It makes you clear. When you accept the parts of yourself you once abandoned, you no longer attract relationships that depend on your self-erasure. You begin to feel peace in saying no, power in setting limits, and freedom in walking away. You stop leaking energy, trying to be everything to everyone, and start becoming fully yourself. That is when your presence becomes a force field. That is when your aura speaks before you do. That is when your spiritual development stops being a concept and starts becoming a lived frequency. And in that frequency, you do not just heal, you transform. You do not just awaken, you remember who you were before the world told you to forget. If you're ready to unlock the hidden treasure within your shadow, don't hesitate to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's claim this transformation together. 6. From emotional sponge to conscious fortress. After the transformation, the empath no longer moves through life as a helpless absorber of emotional debris, but instead becomes a finely tuned instrument of discernment, embodying a kind of spiritual wisdom that Carl Jung hinted at when he spoke of making the unconscious conscious. No longer reactive, the awakened empath develops an internal compass that senses manipulation, projection, and energetic infiltration before it ever breaches their field. What was once chaotic compassion becomes intelligent empathy, sharp, selective, sovereign. Their boundaries are no longer guilt-soaked or porous. They become living membranes of intuitive intelligence, shaped by pain, forged by experience, and protected by purpose. This is not coldness, it is clarity. This is not detachment, it is emotional maturity. What breaks is not the empath's kindness, but their pattern of self-abandonment. The snapping of the empath is not an explosion, it is a holy silence, a spiritual refusal. They stop absorbing and start observing. They do not argue with dysfunction, they outgrow it. They no longer bend to make others feel tall, nor shrink to preserve fragile egos. They see the energetic cost of chronic self-sacrifice and finally decide to pay attention to their own frequency. The awakened empath doesn't just say no, they embody no. Their presence becomes a boundary. Their absence becomes protection. Their distance becomes discernment. What once kept them trapped, guilt, people-pleasing, emotional debt, is now the very thing they shed to breathe. They realize that rescuing is not love, that absorbing pain is not healing, and that spiritual intelligence includes the courage to walk away. As Jung warned, the shadow that is not integrated will act out in unconscious ways. But when the empath embraces their own shadow, they don't become bitter, they become whole. They reclaim their anger as sacred fire, their silence as power, their solitude as sanctuary. No longer do they confuse chaos with chemistry, or loyalty with self-erasure. They recognize projection for what it is, the wound of another trying to live in disguise, and they stop letting it live in them. This transformation isn't a performance, it's a return, a remembering. They do not harden, they refine. They do not shut down, they elevate. Their energy becomes rare, their love becomes clean, their yes becomes a prayer, their not a full sentence. When the empath snaps, it's not the beginning of war, it's the end of illusion. They stop mistaking emotional labor for worth. They stop interpreting exhaustion as proof of love. They stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They trust the vibration more than the apology, the silence more than the excuse, the feeling more than the words. They no longer seek to be chosen. They choose themselves. And that choice becomes an energetic force field, one that says, I see clearly now, and I will not trade my peace for your chaos. Because once the empath awakens, their compassion becomes calibrated, their energy becomes expensive, and their soul finally stops bleeding for what was never theirs to carry. 7. The individuation process, becoming whole. Jung called this transformation the process of individuation, the sacred integration of the ego, the shadow, and the true self. It's not a theory. It's a spiritual awakening that begins the moment the empath stops contorting themselves to fit into other people's comfort zones. No longer ruled by people-pleasing or haunted by the need for external validation, the empath begins to peel back the layers of false identity and reclaim the parts of themselves they once gave away to feel safe, accepted, or loved. The emotional exhaustion, once mistaken as kindness, is revealed as chronic self-abandonment. And in its place rises a new kind of power, quiet, unwavering, and sovereign. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The empath, through deep inner work, begins to reverse that fate. They learn to feel deeply without dissolving into others' pain, to think clearly without absorbing chaotic energy, and to act wisely without waiting for permission. This shift is seismic. The empath no longer interprets their sensitivity as weakness, but as a compass pointing toward truth. They stop seeing boundaries as walls and start seeing them as sacred containers that preserve their emotional clarity. Their presence no longer seeks approval. It commands respect, not through force, but through alignment. Where they once gave without limits, they now offer from fullness, not depletion. The ego that once screamed for recognition becomes quiet, integrated, and in service to the soul's deeper rhythm. The empath doesn't stop caring. They care consciously. They choose their battles, speak their truth without trembling, and withdraw from spaces that insult their spirit. What once looked like withdrawal is now discernment. What once felt like guilt is now grace. In modern life, this transformation is radical. It might look like quitting a job that drains your spirit, ending relationships that thrive on your silence, or simply refusing to explain your peace to those who profit from your chaos. You no longer perform compassion, you embody it. You no longer sacrifice your well-being to prove your love. You no longer bend yourself to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. And when the empath snaps, it's not an explosion, it's an emancipation. It's the end of emotional servitude and the birth of spiritual authority. The empath becomes whole not by fixing the world, but by no longer betraying themselves in the process. This is the path of intelligence, spiritual wisdom, and true awakening, not as a destination, but as a daily devotion to inner alignment. 8. Empowered empaths as healers of the collective. The conscious empath is not merely on a personal healing journey. They are walking, breathing medicine for a planet in emotional distress. In a time when humanity is suffocating under emotional contagion, performative compassion, and digital overwhelm, the empowered empath becomes a spiritual force of nature. They no longer confuse overgiving with love or call self-abandonment a virtue. Instead, they embody a new kind of spirituality, one rooted not in denial, but in depth. Every time they hold space without absorbing toxicity, they disrupt centuries of codependent programming. Each act of discernment becomes an energetic transmission, showing others that boundaries are not walls, but bridges to healthier connection. As Carl Jung warned, the failure to integrate one's unconscious creates projection, and the empath's gift is precisely this: to stop carrying what isn't theirs and begin reflecting what others refuse to see in themselves. This reflection is sacred. It shakes people. It awakens them. To be a conscious empath is to live with open senses and a protected soul. No longer drowning in everyone else's pain, they become the alchemist, not the sponge. They understand that feeling everything is not a curse, but an invitation to feel wisely. In a world that labels deep feelers as broken, they rise as educators of emotional intelligence. And when they stop rescuing those who resist their own growth, they reclaim power that was never meant to be sacrificed. They no longer perform healing. They live it. And that authenticity is magnetic. People feel it not in what the empath says, but in what they no longer tolerate. When an empath says no, it echoes as truth in every direction. That no teaches others to take responsibility for their own energy. That no teaches the world that self-respect is a form of love. And in that sacred refusal to betray themselves, empaths become spiritual leaders without needing titles or followers. Their spirituality is not performative, it's protective. Their spiritual development is not linear, it's layered, messy, alive. They learn to rest without guilt. They learn that their silence is medicine. They learn to disconnect, not to punish, but to recharge. Because what the world needs is not more burnt-out empaths. It needs empaths who are awake, rooted, and energetically sovereign. When they stop absorbing dysfunction and start observing it, they become immune to manipulation. They start seeing through charm and into intention. They trust their nervous system more than someone's excuses. And in doing so, they model a new template for humanity. One where empathy does not equal emotional enslavement, where compassion has clarity, and where sensitivity becomes strength. Their boundaries are no longer about pushing people away. They are about inviting only those who can meet them in truth. Every time they choose self-respect over approval, they break ancestral chains. Every time they rest instead of explain, they restore their soul. They are no longer mirrors for other people's projections. They are windows into another way of being. And in their presence, others remember what real feels like. If this message resonated with you, it's because you were meant to hear it. The empath doesn't break easily, but when they do, it means something sacred within them has awakened. If you've ever felt the weight of others' emotions pressing down on your soul, know that you're not alone, and more importantly, you are powerful beyond what the world can see. Thank you for watching Spiritual Wisdom. If this video brought you clarity or strength, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming videos on spiritual growth, emotional healing, and the deeper truths Carl Jung tried to show us. Until next time, protect your energy, honor your truth, and remember, when the empath finally snaps, it's not the end. It's the beginning of their power.